Bienvenidos, welcome everybody. Embajador Luis Bermúdez, embajador de la República de Uruguay, diplomáticos de la Embajada de Uruguay. Welcome, ambassador and diplomats. Before we begin, allow me, on behalf of the Instituto Cervantes, to express our condolences on the recent passing of Pepe Mujica, the former president of Uruguay and a symbol of political and human honesty. Let's now proceed with today's event. We have what we call Mario Benedetti, the reluctant optimist and his strange beast. And we have for this event a translator, Adam Feinstein, writer, researcher, journalist, poet, film critic, who will be introduced later by Juan Toledo, our chair today, and Sophie Stevens, professor. This event is to mark the publication of Adam Feinstein's translation of Mario Benedetti's extraordinary novela in verse El cumpleaños de Juan Ángel, Juan Angel's birthday, by Teren Press. We have the editor here. I don't know what, we will have some books to buy and to be signed by the translator. Okay, so because after we go to the library and to have this drink of some wine. First, it will be then a conversation with Juan Toledo and Sophie Stevens to discuss the great Uruguayan writer Benedetti's prolific career as a poet, novelist, and playwright. So, as Juan Toledo will be the chair today, let me briefly introduce him, and he will introduce the rest of the speakers. Juan Toledo is a translator, podcaster, editor, and teacher. Born in Colombia, he studied chemistry at the National University and then literature and philosophy at the Birkbeck College and UCL in London, where he also completed a master's degree in translation and Hispanic studies. He worked as a touring officer in the drama and dance department and later as a cultural manager in the arts division of the British Council. He edited one of the first Spanish-language newspapers in Britain, Crónica Latina, and he later became director of an independent radio station in Bristol. He's currently editor and co-host of two ZTR radio podcasts, Artefacto and The Program, and he edits the bilingual digital cultural magazine Perro Negro. He published his first collection of poetry, Ocurrencias y Recurrencias, in 2022. So, nothing else from my side. Thank you very much for being here, and I give the floor to the ambassador, Luis Bermúdez. Thank you.
Good evening to everybody. Thank you, Victor, for your opening remarks and introduction. We really appreciate that you are hosting us once again with an interesting activity for all of us, and sponsored and supported by our embassy, so we feel at home, and thank you very much once again to you and all your team. As you probably know, and most of you probably share with me, this week is has changed, and for something sad, we are not in high spirit because of the passing of late President Mujica. So we thank you for being with us. It's good to be all together. And at the same time, it's a coincidence that we are presenting the translation of El cumpleaños de Juan Ángel by Adam Feinstein. So, congratulations, Adam. And the first thing it comes to my mind is maybe we can trace or draw a parallelism between both personalities or characters, Mujica and Benedetti, that they were very both of them humble people, very simple, very realistic, spontaneous, and they share or they say whatever it came to their minds. So this is something to underscore nowadays, that we are always, or most of the people and different professions or activities, we always are speculating on what to say or not to say. They were straightforward and share their thinking with everybody in use of freedom and liberty and thinking. So there's something that I believe is a common note for these two outstanding personalities. In the political scenario, Mujica will be missed a lot, of course. But today we are gathered in order to present Juan Angel's birthday by Mario Benedetti. I was privileged to know Benedetti a couple of times as part of my diplomatic activity in different parts of the world, and my colleagues here from the embassy will agree with me that in his latest days we used to see him in a cafeteria very close to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Montevideo Center, the center part or center city of Montevideo, where he has his table and chair in a cafeteria in Guarém and San Jose streets. It's a bar and cafe called San Rafael. So this is what was very nice memory. He first, when he went back from Spain to Uruguay, he used to attend this place with his wife, and then after he was a widower, he continued attending and sharing cafe and nice chats with other customers. So this is our last image of Benedetti. Personality, brilliant personalities, one of my favorite Uruguayan authors, along with Onetti. I think is, as a love poet, I think is one of the best, if not the best, in Spanish language. So this is something very, very peculiar, a novel in verse. So we are all keen to, and with a lot of expectation, to listen to Juan, to Adam and Sophie, so not the ambassador of Uruguay, certainly. So thank you very much, and I give the floor to our panelists. Enjoy. Thank you very much.
Do we need this?
Sí, para grabar.
Sí, para la grabación. Hello? Yeah? Okay, thank you. Fine. Well, thank you for coming. Nice to see some known faces. It's good to be here at the Cervantes Institute. It's also good to be talking about Latin American writers at the Cervantes. It's always a pleasure for me personally, as a Latin American. I'm going to introduce very briefly the two people I will be talking to or asking questions to. The other ones, I'm asking the questions, they're answering them, which is the easy one. Okay. Sophie Stevens is a lecturer in Latin American Caribbean Studies at the Institute of Languages, Cultures and Societies at the University of London, where she specializes in Latin American theatre, performance, activism and translation. Her book, Uruguayan Theatre in Translation, Theory and Practice, was published by Legenda in 2022. She's a member of the Out of the Winds Collective, and the translation has been presented at the Royal Court Theatre, Baron Court Theatre, Omnibus Theatre, Cervantes Theatre, and Southwark Playhouse. For those who know about theatre, I know because of my jobs at the British Council, the Royal Court, all these very, very well-renowned places, but the Royal Court is the places in the UK that specializes exclusively on new plays, And Adam Feinstein, I don't have anything, but his Adam biography will be a long one. I know Adam for quite some time. Adam is a journalist, he's a translator, a critic, a film critic, an Spanish, but also he's a media ambassador for the work or the activities of the Autistic Association here in Britain. Adam is the person who knows most about Pablo Neruda in the entire world. He's the biographer of Pablo Neruda. And he has been translated recently several books, all in verse. He started with Rubén Darío, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong. You have started before, but Rubén Darío in verse, translation of Rubén Darío in verse. In rhyme, not in verse, in rhyme, right, thank you. And then you have done El Cumpleaños de Juan Ángel. And you are due to finish a translation, an anthology of León the Grave also, which we are talking about, Big León the Grave today, into English. So he's rendering into English very complicated, very unique and unorthodox poets from Latin America. I'm going to stop there, and we are going to start with a reading. Oh, you're going to say something about Pepe Mujica, aren't you?
Yeah, maybe I'll start
Yeah.
with just a few words about Pepe, because I feel bad in a way, because I'm going to talk about the humour in Mario Benedetti, but maybe you have to forgive me, because Benedetti's humour was extraordinary, and especially comes out in the book. So I think Pepe Mujica would really allow me to that, because they were very close. I think they were very close in personality, as the ambassador rightly said. They had a simplicity, but it was a profound simplicity. They were very knowledgeable, but they didn't show off. Some of you may know that Mujica was wounded. He was shot and lost a lot of blood, and he was jailed for 11 years. I think it was 11 years in a tiny cell. In fact, first of all he escaped from prison in a remarkable operation, which it is claimed was inspired by this very book. Cumpleaños de Juan Ángel. The escape was in 1971, the year that this was published, in fact. Just a very few months afterwards. And Marcos, one of the leaders of the Tupamaros guerrillas, said he got his name. He always said he got his name from Marcos in this book. So I just think it's very sad news. He's a remarkable figure, Mujica. Wonderfully literate, very intelligent, funny, and sad loss to Latin America and to the world. Good. To turn back to this book. I'm not going to. I'll read a little bit from early on. I'm going to read in Spanish and English. Just a few extracts. I'll try and make them relevant to what we're discussing. Just to say, I first came across this book decades ago when I was growing up in Cambridge. Our house was full of books and poets. My mother, Elaine Firestone, was one of the poets, and ran the Cambridge Poetry Festival. So we had Octavio Paz staying with us, and Allen Ginsberg staying with us. And somehow I got hold of a copy of the Spanish edition of this, Cumpleaños de Juan Ángel. It's never been translated to English before, so I can't have cheated. I can't have read it anywhere. This is my translation as the first. And I was absolutely captivated, even though I was very young, by the humour in it, by the sensitivity, the tenderness, the way he described families. The book is about the journey of an 80-year-old boy as he grows up and becomes more and more radicalised and militant until 34. But he's a middle-class boy, and he finds it hard to escape from the middle class. It's part of the book is about, part of one of the themes is about that, difficulty to escape. And he talks about his parents, his mother and his father. He compares them to a flamingo and an owl. Lots of animal imagery, and I loved that growing up. I even translated a bit early on. And then I came back to this, and thankfully, Dominic here, the publisher of Tenor Press, accepted my suggestion to publish this wonderful, absolutely extraordinary book. Novels in verse are very rare everywhere, never mind in Latin America. They just aren't many. And just very quickly, why did he call it his strange beast, Benedetti? Because he was originally going to write it in prose. And he started to write it in prose, and he thought, this isn't working. This is not working. I prefer it to be verse. I prefer it to be verse. And so that's where he changed everything, and he says, I'm so glad I did. In interviews he said it worked. Anyway, without more ado, we're going to read some extracts. One is going to read the Spanish, so I'm going to read from early on. Just microphone way. No, it's intermittent. Yeah. We'll just read page 20. 22, yes. Early on, this is where he's describing his early years. When he's 8, growing up, and his family around him. And this is to illustrate the humour.
Okay, the whole page. 22. Hola, digo, con la voz de ayer corregida por el modo de hoy. Que los cumplas muy feliz, dice mamá flamenco, poniendo la sonrisa a toda su elegancia, que no es mucho. ¿Por qué será que el cariño se rodea de fosforescencias inútiles? Sin embargo, hay que admitir que estos besos me hacen justicia. Tiernos y discontinuos besos con gusto a tangerina. Es cierto, en cierto modo me siento como un precoz profesional de la dicha. Aprovéchate, Osvaldo, que el rencor se acerca como un oleaje, la tristeza como una nube de mejillas negras, la hipocresía como una campana venenosa, la soledad como la soledad, y basta. Habrá paredes en abundancia para golpear mi incipiente ceño, barro en cantidad suficiente para enterrar mis pies, sagrada podredumbre para inhalar mi desmayo, amplio mundo para llorar, ¿qué carajo? Mientras tanto, profesionalismo mi felicidad, soy el dueño del santo, el latifundista del parabién. Tengo 8 años y un discurso flamenco a mi lado. Levántate, dice, y yo clausuro la modorra como un arcón cuyas bisagras lloran. El colchón también se queja amargamente. Los póstigos por fin se abren. El sol penetra y lame con urgencia las paredes.
And I've got a note that says that some of this could actually come from some of this from Rubén Darío, the great Nicaraguan poet, who I mentioned, because of the humour, the colloquy, especially a superb poem of Rubén Darío, Epístola a la Señora de Warnes, which is a letter that Rubén Darío, Nicaraguan poet who died in 1916, much earlier, he wrote in verse, but it's addressed to the wife of Leopoldo de Warnes, the Argentinian poet, and Benedetti always said that poem could have been written yesterday. Mm-hmm. The colloquialisms and the humour. Hi, I say. Yesterday's voice corrected by today's mustiness. Very happy birthday, says Mama Flamingo, injecting a smile with all the elegance she can muster, which isn't much. Why is it that affection is always surrounded by a useless glow? You have to admit, I really do deserve these kisses. Tender, intermittent kisses with their tangerine tang. In a way, I feel like a precocious professional joy merchant. Make the most of it, Osvaldo, because bitterness is sweeping in like a tidal wave. Unhappiness, like a cloud of darkened cheeks. Hypocrisy, like a venomous bell. Loneliness, just like loneliness. That's enough for now. There'll be plenty of walls to bash my incipient frown against. Enough mud to swallow up my feet. Enough blessed putrefaction to absorb my dismay. A whole world to weep in. What the hell? But meanwhile, I make happiness my profession. I'm the owner of my saint's name, the little landlord of congratulations. I'm 8 years old, with a discreet flamingo beside me. Get up, she says. And I lock away my drowsiness. A chest with weeping hinges. The mattress also whines bitterly. The shutters open at last. The sun penetrates and greedily licks the walls. Now, the humour comes from the images, and then this little boy talking almost like an adult sometimes. The incongruency, but it works. It somehow works. And we follow him through on this journey. The ambassador, I think, rightly said that Benedetti was a great love poet. He was one of the truly great love poets of the 20th century, I think. And love was a kind of panacea for him, a cure against pain, against the injustice. But he, like Pablo Neruda, he was a political. His love poems are political. I mean, if you look at his most famous love poem, Te Quiero. He says, tus manos son mi caricia, mis acordes cotidianos. Te quiero porque tus manos trabajan por la justicia. Si te quiero es porque sos mi amor, mi cómplice y todo. En la calle, codo a codo, somos mucho más que dos. That could be Neruda speaking. He's saying, he's talking about solidarity, human solidarity. Love brings solidarity. You know, in the street, walking arm in arm or elbow in elbow, we're more than two. There's more than two of us. That's very moving. Why is it moving? Because that's it. When we're in love, that's how we feel. You know, we feel not only is it a unique love, but we feel that we're part of the universe. We can do anything. We feel omnipotent, and he's wonderful that way. That's why, apart from Neruda, I would say Otto Benedetti is the Latin American love poet that most people quote.
Erotic too.
Incredibly erotic and sensual. Yeah. He is. One thing I didn't say about Mujica, by the way, is Mujica in 2010, when he was then president of Uruguay, he read a poem of Benedetti. It's hard to imagine, I have to say this, a British politician reading a poem. I mean, out loud, I mean, it's not very likely, but he read it, and it was a poem about the drudgery, or how Mujica saw the drudgery of office life. Interestingly enough, though, Benedetti, he wrote his most famous novel, La Tregua, of course, The Truce, which is about a relationship in an office. And actually, if you read that carefully, he never says that the routine is abominable. There's a kind of, going back to autism now, going back to autism, actually he's come to like the routine, the structure of the day. It's a fascinating novel, La Tregua, turned into, I think, a mediocre film by Sergio Renan. Some people love it. It's got very good actors, Anemia Patrotto and fantastic stars in it. I don't think it quite works, but maybe you cannot turn Benedetti's novels into films. They have a richness which doesn't lend themselves. But let me put it back to you.
No, but thinking about the thing what you said, we have to be careful with the ambassadors here, but Benedetti did say that Uruguay was a huge, enormous office. You know, everybody was a funcionario in Paris. And his novels and his whole sort of milieu is about office life. You know, everybody's middle class, everybody's a funcionario, as we call it in Latin America and the Spanish language.
But remember, his father was a terrible businessman.
Yeah.
He kept losing his job. And so young Mario had to keep going out to work for the family. And he took lots of office jobs in bicycle shops, in bicycle repair, menial jobs. And I think part of him got to like it. He's got to almost like it. And so when he says that Uruguay is a big office, maybe that's not almost a piropo.
It's a piropo.
Yeah.
Well organized office. But let's talk about the book, because I want to also, obviously, something to talk about theatre, the language of theatre. But let's start with this extraordinary book, and it is extraordinary. First account, you don't find many novels in verse. In English there are a few, I can think of, but in the Spanish, almost non-existent. This is one of the very, very first. It's in free verse. Now, very interesting, you were talking about the names. The whole novel takes a Judician, James Joyce kind of approach. It happens in one day. It starts at 7th, I actually noted down.
7:30 in the morning.
7:30 in the morning, exactly. The exact time is 7:50 in the morning.
Oh, sorry.
7:50 in the morning, sorry, it's in the book, yes. And finish at midnight.
I'll change the clock.
And it's basically, as Adam said, is the progression of a child of 8 years old becoming up to 35. But it's a novel about, it's a poem. And the thing is, when you start reading it, you start thinking, is this a novel or is this a long poem?
Exactly.
It's in between the two, and that's the beauty of it. And it's an element of existentialism. I'm going to ask one of the first questions about the novel is this. In the family, he mentioned the names. He refers to his family in animal names. The flamingo, the lion is the grandfather, the owl is the father, and the grandmother is the hyena. And So it's a fable. His family becomes a fable in
Yes.
certain ways, and it's a loveless family because the flamingo, doesn't love, the owl.
It's not entirely loveless
It's not
because
okay.
he has his love for his sister, which is
Oh yes, he loves his sister. That's true. Yes.
that saves the book.
Yeah.
Or it saves Benedetti from saves the book, from total and utter the danger of hypocrisy. And Benedetti sees the society around him and he says that nobody's telling the truth.
Yeah.
Everybody's lying except you, my little sister.
Yeah.
And the sections where he talks to his sister are unbelievably moving.
Yeah,
I'll read one later.
And it's interesting. The language does change a little bit. He is a very sophisticated 8 years old, but then the language becomes much more politicized towards the end. There's a passage that perhaps I read about, similar to that poem that you just read about the solidarity of marching, elbow to elbow and shouting, political slogans and stuff. But then the only interesting thing is this: it has no punctuation. The entire thing has no punctuation. There's only one capital letter at the beginning, at least in the. Well, there's a question about it.
Well, yes.
Yes, because in the Spanish, it has no. It's just the first capital letter is the first letter of the poem, and the rest is in lowercase, proper names and stuff. So with no punctuation, you see, I'm a bad reader, as you already noticed. So you can find different ways of reading it in certain ways. So it's doing that what Cortázar did with Rayuela. You play with the reader. The reader has to participate in his own. It's an active reading, but more than a passive reading. That's an interesting point.
No, absolutely. I totally agree. He makes the reader work, and,
Yeah.
he's not ashamed of that. I'm glad he does. It makes it an enriching, two-directional operation, really, in this book. Very much so. You have to think. You have to. It's some passages are not simple. They're sophisticated. There are neologisms. There are Uruguayismos.
Yes. So,
which I have to explain in the notes. I don't like using notes on the whole because it stops the rhythm of the.
But it doesn't
in this
reach.
case, you need them.
no, but it doesn't reach. Even as a Latin American reader, it helps. It helps. Notes because there's certain things that you didn't know about it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, of course.
Yes. And the other thing is this there's a certain element of existentialism too. It is this kind of thing about the identity. They think about class.
Yes.
The class is about, and mentioned the losing of the class. And probably, some people will have to say something about in the theater, the whole transformation, the class transformation, the awareness, the concientización, as we say in Spanish.
Yeah.
That process. And it's quite interesting
Yeah.
how the language changes.
When many middle-class intellectuals in Latin America were seduced by the left wing, of course, Benfica and Benedetti were very much left wing, by the guerrilla movement.
Yeah.
Many of them joined.
Yeah.
But the middle class, it's interesting that Osvaldo, his surname, the boy, before he changes his name to Juan Angel, he is called Osvaldo Puente. Puente means bridge in Spanish. And he's trying to make this bridge between his original bourgeois self and the new guerrilla militant, and he can't entirely do it. It's a part of the novel is about.
Yeah.
He keeps his bourgeois self keeps popping up.
Yeah.
Over his
You cannot
shoulder,
get rid of
saying,
his-
"Oh yeah, I'm still here."
Yeah. You cannot get rid of completely
Yeah.
this, of upbringing. Yes. Yeah. Let's talk about the language a little bit, very quickly. He writes a novel in Cuba.
Yeah.
I don't know, I got this impression that Cuba is the place of the Baroque. And there's an element of Baroque in this language because, this sort of kind of new words, neologism, archaism also uses certain words which are kind of old-fashioned words in Spanish. Do you think that he just kind of Cubanized what he was writing in La Habana?
That's a very interesting question. First thing to say about Cuba, of course, that there were two key events that politicized Benedetti. His first trip to the United States in 1959, where he witnessed firsthand the racism and the terrible working conditions of the normal person in the street. And he was struck by that, and he thought, this can't be right, this can't be. And then he moved to Cuba in 1966, and that's where he wrote this book. And I think it's a very good point that he was infected by linguistically infected by the Cuban Baroque, and it's a very good point. And he's, of course, is very much loved in Cuba.
Yeah, absolutely.
Still to this day, very much, yeah.
And the other thing, I was talking to Sophie just before this. If you think about this, he actually joined the Tupamaros, the Movimiento Tupamaros, in 1971, the year when the book was published. He finished writing La Habana in 1970. You can read it as a personal letter of introduction himself into a political movement which was illegal at the time. In fact, there are los innombrables, the ones you cannot name. Why? Because it's dangerous. People have been arrested. The dedication of the book is to the founder of the Tupamaros.
Raúl Sendich.
Raúl Sendich, he actually shelters, at Benedetti's house, with all the risk of being in prison and stuff like that for a few weeks when he was escaping justice in Uruguay. So it's very interesting when you go, it's like, if you think about people like Marquez, think about people like, the sort of kind of the committed leftists in Latin American literature. He was the one who probably was more committed than anybody else by getting into a movement that he knew was illegal. It could send him to prison, torture, death, whatever. And in fact, he exiled. During the first years of it. He returned to Uruguay after the democracy. When
Yes,
the democracy returned.
he had a wonderful word for returning from exile called desexilio. Disexile, unexile. Because what he meant was that you've undergone something very important. It's a process of coming back from exile. You has completely changed you. That's what he means. Something else I should mention about the language. We're talking about the language.
Yes.
Is that he was an asthmatic.
Was he?
He had now this may seem trivial. I don't think it is at all.
You know that.
My mother Elaine was asthmatic, and I think it affected the way she wrote poetry. So you find breaths, you find the poetry breathes in this book. And one of my students, by the way, has written a whole PhD on asthma in poets. It's not a medical book. It's not a medical book. It's a book about how it affects their. It's a wonderful PhD. And he moved to Mallorca later in life before the climate, because the climate was so good for his asthma. So that was it's very important, I think.
Yeah.
That you can read, when some of the extracts I'll read, I think you will hear the breathing.
Yes.
Yeah, anyway.
No. You just talking about that. I mean, this political kind of commitment that he had. The other thing that we were saying about it, which is important with Benedetti, is the one that he's hugely popular in Latin America. Hugely. But why? Okay, why somebody like Benedetti is hugely popular? I got my theory, which is that his language is very simple, but his ideas are not simplistic at all.
No.
He's a very, as profoundly, simply profoundly.
Simply profound.
Simply profound,
Or profoundly simple.
Profound, simple, whatever. And he's full, obviously he loves those oxymorons, he loves those things. But if you read Benedetti, yes, it's about middle class. It's all about middle class. The short stories particularly, some people talk about the theater, his pieces of the theater. But if you read him, it's something very mundane, something that everybody knows. Anybody who has worked in an office, next to a photocopier and, bad coffee, will know about this kind of stuff. But he writes these kind of things, and this kind of anguish, this nagging, the punctuation of the mundanity, in everyday existence. And that's the reason why people like him, And he did his career completely parallel to the rest of what we call the great writers of Latin America. He was a part of the boom. He never quoted the boom. He never wrote a novel like 100 Years of Solitude or Yo Supremo. He would not do that. It was against him to write such a book. He would write something very simple that people would read in one day or 2 afternoons. That's it. That's what he aimed for. And you read. That's the way to read Benedetti. Sit down, in one go, read the book. That's how you read it. And it's easy to read. It's very pleasurable. He's one of those people who give you pleasure to read.
Yeah.
And he publishes from his own pocket the first 8 or 7 novels that he published because he was hugely prolific.
And his short stories are wonderful.
Yeah.
A short story. I mean, he talked about the hatred between the parents.
The parents, yeah.
I mean, he wrote a marvelous short story called La Guerra de la Paz, War and Peace. It's about a child overhearing his parents arguing. It's beautifully written.
Yeah.
And so true to life, so sincere.
Yeah.
And you can't help feeling it must have been based on something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Autobiographical, possibly, I don't know. But it's so wonderful, yeah.
And also the political element. And perhaps now it's time to bring Sophie into that. Sophie, I mean, you know the theatre. I mean, how political is theatre? Considering particularly that theatre is a very political art form, I would say that it's one of the most political art forms in literature is theatre, perhaps. How political is Benedetto?
Hello. Wow. What a question to start with. Well, I prepared something to talk about Pedro el Capitan, which is maybe a good example of Benedetti engaging with politics, but in a really global sense. And so maybe I should share some reflections on that.
Go for it.
Shall I go? Yeah. Shall I do that? Because I think I don't know if people here know Pedro el Capitan.
No, most people.
It was performed in London in 2016. So I think, but Benedetti isn't as well known as a theatre writer. Actually, he's much more well known for his stories and for his poetry. But actually, lots of the things that you said about the language that is in his poetry and in his stories connects with the way that he uses language in theatre. He's interested in finding new ways to talk about things. And I think that is actually, at the time, for example, that he wrote Pedro el Capitan, which was 1979, when he himself was in exile, he was interested in experimenting with language and finding ways to talk about these connections, these puentes, these connections or disconnections between humans. And what makes us human beings and why that's important and how we might understand each other. I say this about Pedro el Capitan because it's set in a detention centre where we know that torture is happening, but actually what the play stages is a long conversation between a political prisoner and an interrogator, the captain. And it was awarded it's called a Golden Flame Award by Amnesty International, and so that instantly kind of propelled this play into kind of a different sphere where it was really about human rights violations throughout the world. And I think that that's actually something that the 2016 production in London, which was produced by Blackboard Theatre Company, it had a Latin American director from Colombia, actually, Miguel Torrezumba, and it was staged in the Vaults, which is it's still a venue. It was used for lots of different things, but it's under Waterloo Station, so you could hear the trains going overhead. And there was this real sense that we were in this intimate space. We've been given this insight into this dialogue, this discussion between two men on opposing sides, and then what were we going to do about it afterwards? And through the actual performance, and then through a connection with a London-based NGO that is interested in human rights violations and interested in stopping those, there was a specific call to action through that organisation, which is called Redress. But Benedetti was interested in kind of how those two men that are seemingly in very opposing situations might find a common ground. And one of the ways they find a common ground is through what you've mentioned, which is class. Another way they find a common ground is actually through a love of Montevideo and a love of the city. It's also through their lots of what you've talked about, the relationships to family, and those things are very important. And so when I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about, here I am giving an example of a play that is about a situation of repression. It's about a situation where it's a confrontation. The captain is trying to get information out of Pedro, and it's set across four parts, and each one ends with a no from Pedro. And we know that these discussions are punctuated by torture sessions. We see Pedro's, and it's in the stage directions that his sort of physical appearance deteriorates, but we don't see any of that violence. And is there optimism in this? I was thinking, as I was thinking about what the title of this event was and what he might be trying to say. And here, I'll just give you a few reflections on optimism, which I think is Benedetti is concerned with what makes us human beings, and he was also concerned with the future in this. And that's actually written into the play. There's a moment where the captain says, "¿Quién te dice que algún día esta situación se invierta y se vos quien me interrogue?" Who's to say that someday we might not find ourselves here again, but the other way around, so that it's you interrogating me? And I think what Benedetti is asking us to think about in that situation is, well, what are we going to do in the future? How, through the ways in which we connect, these bridges that we establish, and the ways in which we can respect and understand each other as human beings, how are we going to think about a future where this situation can't happen again?
Yeah. It's very interesting what you say, because it reminds me one part of the book about this sort of kind of when everybody's equal, the common ground of everything. And one of the techniques that Tupamaro used to do to escape from the police and Dolores is going to use the sewage in Montevideo. So he used to hide and things. And he said the sewage is the place where everybody's shit is exactly the same. Everybody's the same. So it stinks, but basically everybody's excrement is no different. And he talks about those elements. But the thing is, the other thing about the political, it's a question for both of you about the language and the political in Benedetti. He doesn't write manifestos. He doesn't do that. His political is kind of very gentle. It's a sort of kind of almost reflective, humanistic. And I don't know, I mean, for me, that works as a reader. He's not trying to persuade you of anything else. I don't know, what do you think? I mean, what do you think, Sophia, about that?
I would totally agree with that. I think he's trying to get us to understand one another. I think for him, in what he does in Pedro el Capitan, in other writing, what he's trying to say is that there are these things that connect us all. We have to find ways of understanding each other, and actually the political then comes from the personal. So there are huge reflections, and so his novelistic style actually comes out in his theatre plays, because there are huge reflections on family, on society, on things outside of the immediate situation around them, because that's, I think for him, the political is very much in the personal, and those personal choices that we all have to make every day, which I think goes back to the bridges, actually, because I think he's interested in how we're constantly in this action of kind of creating bridges and drawing them up, and we do that every day in every interaction, but there might be a way to do that and to establish a longer connection with someone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I was just looking for a quote, because I don't think he was, as you say, he wasn't a dogmatic political figure at all. I don't think he believed in guerrilla tactics for their own sake. In fact, I would argue that he was more like an advocate of what the late Harvard professor Joseph Nye, who died recently, called soft power. The belief that seduction is always more effective than coercion. And he was a seductive personality, Benedetti. The people who met him, he was quite shy, but very warm when you got to meet him, when you got to know him. And I know that...
Did you meet him?
No, I didn't, but I know so many people who have. And they all said the same. He was a wonderful person to spend time with. Very warm, very loving, very cariñoso, very affectionate.
Generous.
Very generous with his time and money, and very loving. Another thing that he had in common with Pepe Mujica was that they had very long, happy marriages. And when Benedetti's wife, Luz, died, it was a terrible blow. Benedetti died in 2009, and just a few years after Luz died, I think. I think that was just a terrible blow for him. They were so close. I don't think, as far as I know, they had no children. Someone can correct me if they did. I don't think they had. And yet he's very tender and very wonderfully wise in this book about families and about how children speak. The other thing is, going back to the humour again, that he was famous for these aphorisms. There's so many, I could quote hundreds, but they were a bit like the Gregorias. Anyone who knows the Spanish poet Ramon Gómez de la Serna. Ramon Gómez de la Serna, who died in the 1960s, people forget that he lived so long. He died in the 1960s, spanned the 19th century almost. And he made these one-liners. He did this one. I don't think they would have liked each other very much, by the way, because Ramon Gómez de la Serna, for one thing, he turned to the right and actually supported Franco in the end. which is appalling. And also, there's no wisdom. I don't think there's as much wisdom in the Gregoriya. They're funny, they make you laugh, but you know, let me just give a quote. I'll just quote a couple of Benedetti's, I don't know what you call them, aphorisms, and you'll see that there's something behind the humour which there isn't in some of the Ramon Gómez La Serna. Well, I've got so many, I'm just trying to choose one. I should have chosen some before. There's one that goes, well, the memory is, I think it's yo amo, tu amo, él ama, amamos, aman. If only it was not a conjugation, but the truth, or something like that. Something like that. So in Spanish, you know, I love, you love, we love, they love. If only that was more than a conjugation and the truth. But, I mean, these are wonderful, you know. Well, I've got lost. Go back to another question, and I'll find some more.
Well, I was thinking about humor. I mean, there's certain quotes I find. I mean, moments when you actually laugh about it.
Yeah.
He's talking about his purity. This is obviously when he's still 8 years old. No, he might be about 12 years old. I don't know. During the day, he might be at 11 o'clock in the morning. You know, because throughout the day he changes ages. But he says he's getting. Mientras tanto, salgo lentamente del pijama. El flamenco se fue como rocotudas promesas y sólidos chantajes. Por fin me dejó a solas con mi cumpleaños. La ducha lava todas mis preguntas y poros. Todavía no tengo vello en el único vértice que importa. Así que no tiene que decir que todavía puberty, ¿sí? No tengo vello en el único vértice que importa. A mí eso me hizo reír. Adelante con gojas, desayuno relagos, estornudos, tengo que almacenar. Yo compatriota Osvaldo Puente de 8 agostos, toda la realidad, su violento milagro.
Yeah.
Pasa de humor a unas reflexiones filosóficas así de la nada. Son 3 líneas y es realmente un placer leerlo. Es increíble, es como navegando un río, no sé, un riachuelo, pero las sorpresas que
Casi
hay.
nada español.
¿Ah?
Casi nada español.
Sí. Oh, Johnny, ahí va. It's like sailing down a brook, you know, in a very nice landscape, ahí va. I mean, there's plenty of things in the book.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, just to go back to why did I call this session of Reluctant Optimist?
Yeah.
He was asked in Cuba, and he said, well, he started off being negative. He said it's impossible that the world, when you look at the panorama, with just one power that's leading everything. Talking about the United States, obviously. Is it possible to think this world can improve, he says. Let's see, and then he quotes François Lyotard, the French philosopher, that says we're going to go completely down the drain. But then he said, esta vez confío en que podamos salvarnos a pesar de que cada vez resulte más difícil. Pero si eso sucede va a ser por lo que venga desde abajo, no por lo que nos viene de arriba. Y consecuencia criminal. Confío en que los hombres y mujeres del futuro aprendan a salvarse, y lo digo porque uno sabe que como individuo, como persona se va a morir, es la edad de vida, pero nunca queremos que aquello que dejamos atrás desaparezca. Sería horroroso, siempre haré lo posible, sé que no puedo sobrevivir, para que la humanidad sobreviva y para que la gente viva mejor de lo que viva. So he's saying, you know, I hope that men and women in the future will learn to save themselves. I say it because as an individual, we know we're going to die. That's the law of life. But we don't want that. We don't want the things that we leave behind to disappear. That would be horrific. So I will always do what's possible, do everything I can, even though I know I can't survive. I will do everything I can to make sure that humanity survives, so that people live better. And that's talking, going back to generosity of spirit that you mentioned, Sophie. It's remarkable. You could, and the lack of egotism. Lack of egotism.
And solidarity too, a big thing there. because in that part that you just read, the solution comes from below, not from above.
Exactly.
That's an element of solidarity, in certain way, working together. Yes, absolutely. It's quite interesting. In the article in the TLS, there's an article in the Times Literary Supplement reviewing, nice review of your translation. And she talks about a small man with a long name. His full name was Mario Orlando Hamlet Harley Breno Benedetti Farrugia. De nuevo, Mario Orlando Hamlet Harley Breno Benedetti Farrugia. 7 names. But the interesting thing is this. Obviously, his parents were into literature with a name like that. At least he was a writer. Imagine he would become an accountant. With a name like that, you could not be an accountant. Orlando, obviously, the famous novel by Virginia Woolf, Hamlet, Hardy, and then we could argue that he put Benedetti into the names of the literature in the world. So actually, he added that name because you got 3 names, but with him, we got the four names out of the 7. So he actually
I think Sophie has something to add.
No, I think go.
No,
I'm
I was
going to read
gonna-
an example and then I'll say
No, you have to reply to the Hamlet.
The Hamlet, yeah.
No, I think let's. I was going to take it in a slightly different direction.
Oh, right, okay. I wanted to just read another extract.
Yeah.
With more humour, but more political and more social commentary than the first passage. This is where he goes to see his friend, one of his few friends, called Baldomero, the cobbler, the shoemaker. That's a very significant choice of name because Benedetti actually decided to become a poet in the 1930s after he read the work of actually a very minor Argentinian poet called Baldomero Fernández Moreno, who was one of the chief proponents of a school of a movement called Cintillismo, from sencillo meaning simple, and that was a movement which aimed to break away from what it saw as excessive flowery language and imagery of modernismo. The modernismo, the part of Rubén Darío that Benedetti perhaps didn't like so much, not the part that came out in the epistola that I mentioned earlier, the letter to Livonius' wife, and to use simple language instead. And so that's what Benedetti did. And later on, he turned away from Centillismo, Benedetti. But this is just a passage here, so this page.
Yes. Just before I read that one, it's interesting, but we're talking about this is existentialism. And anybody who knows El Rio de la Plata, and Sophie, and I'm sure will have something to say about it. Argentina and Uruguay, for some strange reason, was producing existentialism even before the French were there. Even before the French thought that freedom was a problem. After the Second World War, they decided that freedom was a problem. The Argentinians were doing it, and certainly, obviously the Uruguayans, we got Onetti, the ambassador mentioned Onetti, but we got people like Ernesto Sabato. So this part of the world generated a kind of literature which was doing into reflecting upon the existence of the human being. And this appears in this book too, a lot, in a very nice way, in a kind of heavy, sort of kind of deterministic way. No, it's done very nicely. Okay, this is page 74. El cielo llueve con todos sus bandoneones, pero hasta que la gran claraboya no se abra, su aguacero de bochorno no empapará mi rostro ni tomará el aspecto de mis lágrimas. Esto es pulpa de tango y el resto verdurita, en vista de lo cual decido irme a lo del viejo Baldomero, a su altillo de pulida miseria. Baldomero es un fantasma remendón, tan flaco que el viento le silba en las mandíbulas. A su lado tiene un balde rigurosamente oxidado, donde extrae clavitos que muerde y saborea. Baldomero es por sí solo una hazaña, alguien que esperó en vano a Goya o Modigliani. Sabía que ibas a venir, dice mirándome por sobre la media suela clavada y el taco de goma. Lo sabía porque sos normalmente egocéntrico. Tenés tu autoculto de la personalidad. Cumplís 15 y querés de algún modo calibrar el eco de tan gloriosa celebración, pero a mí no me molesta. Al contrario, me entusiasma verte tan cándido, en tu orgullo sin trastienda, tan lleno de signos y de auspicios, de vastos presagios, es decir, de fatigas.
Yeah. The sky, the sky is raining bandonions, but so long as that great big skylight's not open, the sweltering shower won't drench my face or look just like my tears. This is tango pulp, and the rest mere trifles. So that's why I decided to visit old Baldomero in the well-polished squalor of his attic. Baldomero is a ghost-like cobbler, so thin the wind whistles through his jawbones. He always has a carefully rusted bucket next to him, full of nails he pulls out, bites, and chews with delight. Baldomero is a one-man tour de force. He waited in vain for Goya or Viviani. I knew you'd come, he says, staring at me, over the half-finished shoe sole and the rubber pad. I knew because you're normally so self-centred with your very own personality cult. You just turned 15 and you'd like to measure the echo decibels of your moment of glory, but I don't mind at all. On the contrary, I'm thrilled to see you here, so candid, so proud, so lacking inside, so full of signs and auspices, vast omens, in other words, burdens. Maybe we should, can we just leave the next bit, one more page?
Well, basically,
Because it's,
okay.
It's his message to, Baldomero's message to the young boy.
Botija, which means young person, botija. Botija, no sé en realidad qué decirte. 15 años es una edad linda para no morirse. Claro, no me refiero a esa poca muerte que reclama pesames y puteadas. Más bien quiero decir que es una edad linda para no morir de rutina de orden, incurable e infecciosa, para no morir de certificados, de disculpas, de prudencia, de tendríamos que. Y sin embargo, no sé qué decirte. No creas que me callo solo porque aprieto estos clavitos con los labios. En realidad no sé qué decirte porque ninguna lección sirve. Hoy tenés una mirada dulce, esplendorosa, y mañana o pasado no te reconocerás de tan amargo. Hoy miras a las muchachas de la lluvia, las muchachas del sol, y tu primera taquicardia de homenaje te deja débil con las cejas en alto y una nostalgia que empieza en los riñones.
Well, kid, I don't really know what to say. 15 is a fine age, not to die. Of course, I don't mean the petty death which demands condolences and insults. I mean 15 is a fine age not to die from routine, from an incurable bout of contagious order, from certificates, from excuses, from prudence, from we should haves. And yet, I've no idea what to tell you. Don't think I'm not saying a word because my mouth's full of nails. The truth is, I don't know what to say because any advice would be useless. Today you look so sweet and radiant, and tomorrow, or the day after, you'll feel so bitter you won't recognise yourself. Today you stare at the girls in the rain, the girls in the sun, and your first tachycardia in their honour leaves you feeble, your eyebrows raised, with nostalgia gripping your kidneys.
Well, I wondered if we should say something that we talked about before this event, which was to do with Benedetti's legacy, right?
Absolutely.
I think we talked about how much he connected with his audiences and with different readers around the world, actually, and translation is also part of that legacy as well, and so making his work accessible to new audiences is also part of that. And I think all of the things that we've tried to give you examples of the way in which Benedetti connects with his audiences, makes them feel that they're connected to him, makes them think about their humanity, the relationships in their lives. I think those are the things that mean that he's so great. You know, why he's so great to work with students. Actually, the reason I've got lots of books in front of me is because I teach, and you know, this edition of La Tregua is fantastic to use with students. Benedetti's language is wonderful to work with students, students of Spanish or students of literature, and I think sometimes there's a resistance, and I've got a bit of an example of that, of maybe a bit of a resistance to Benedetti. But I think there are more bridges than not, and I think you are creating another bridge through this translation.
What a kind lady I have on my right.
Yeah.
It's not on my right in political sense, but I didn't know she just fed me that. Anyway, that does bring me on to the issues of translation. I do want to, there's an example here where he says in Spanish, ¿Dónde están los faltos de cumpleaños? Porque de todo han sido despojados incluso del pedacito de embalaje en que la madre los parió. Now, what are you going to do with that? Because it's one of his Benedetti's many delicious plays on words, whose ingenuity is almost impossible to capture in English. The Spanish original is en que la madre lo parió, literally meaning, in this context, when the mother gave birth to it, because you're talking about the calendar, huh? But of course, he's cleverly playing on the very common Spanish insult. La madre que te parió, meaning you son of a bitch or something. Even stronger. I won't go stronger because we have an ambassador in the I wouldn't use undiplomatic language. But
First time I this expression.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So is it possible? So what I did was I said, where are the birthday gaps? Because they've been stripped bare, even the scrap of calendar which says when their bitch of a mother gave birth to them. So you capture both senses. So I've added the other sense. It's the only way I thought of doing it. So otherwise you lose one of the senses. I don't think that's justified.
I pick up a couple of those ones.
Oh, good. Have you got another one?
Yeah, another one. In page 124, the fulano y fulanés.
Yes.
And I love the way that you solve that problem. The fulano. 124. 124.
Oh my God, 124.
124. Yes.
Yeah, that was a very difficult one to do.
Yeah, the fulano fulanés. I think about how long did it take you to solve that one? Because everybody in the Spanish fulano is. How do you translate fulano?
Anybody get a
Tom, Dick, or Harry.
Yeah.
Anybody.
Yeah, so piensa que fulano es una mierda y hace lo posible para erradicar la fulanés.
Yes.
And so I said, they think so-and-so is a shit and do everything possible to eradicate his so-and-so. His so-and-so. Yeah,
That was good.
Very, very
That was good.
What was the other one?
So yes. Yeah. The other one was.
I have to remind myself, yeah.
Yeah, the other ones. The one about this, there was a funny part about the one with the statues getting ill. The country is doing so badly that even the statues start to look ill.
Oh, yes.
This is brilliant.
Oh, that's, absolutely.
168.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Well, that is the solution.
And the final one, the other one is the one you said. He's talking about el poder político, el poder ejecutivo, el judicial. Dice el joder político. El joder judicial.
No, what did I do with that? That was almost that stopped the translating. You know what? I almost gave up.
That was tough one because
What did I 150?
152 the poder político.
Yeah, I stopped. You wouldn't like to hear this. My publisher here, I thought, Dominic, I'm going to have to write to him and say, this is no good. It won't work. But because that one line, I thought, what the hell?
Yeah, that was a tough one.
Yeah.
Joder político, yes.
I just had to play on words.
Yes.
It made no sense as a literal translation. So, del poder ejecutivo, el joder legislativo, el poder judicial, and I said, an executive power. The legislative power and the judicial power, because it makes no sense. It makes nonsense anyway. Of course, you lose the satirical, political satire, but there is no. I tried everything, and in the end, I thought I'm going to just have to use a similar word in English to power and add a consonant.
But it's so ingenious in Spanish, isn't it?
It's unbelievable.
In a continent, people don't believe in the state or anything like that. Have to be careful with them. Yes, that kind of thing, And
afterwards, we're having a drink. Anyone can come up with a way of getting around that, please. The second edition, Don, we'll credit them because I thought so long to do that. What was another example? Sorry, another
No, the final one is no, it was about a funny aspect. The one with the statues in page 168. That's the country is doing so badly that the statues are even they look ill.
Yeah, oh
I found that
yes.
funny.
And of course, the other thing is the local references
Yeah.
and the use of local Uruguay or Platense.
Platense. Yeah.
So there's well, the references, I just had to put them in a note. So here you had me pregunto si mi pecado será solo de omisión, no haberlos quemado, no haber visitado luego frente a la alegre pira, tocando despacito, Cambalache de Discépolo in La Joner con una suerte de Nerón González. Now, I think even a Uruguayan reader would have problems understanding what the hell is going on. I have to say thank you to the Fundación in Montevideo. We founded the Benedict Foundation.
Yes.
They were so, I mean, I rang them up lots of times and I said, what does this mean? Sometimes they said, I haven't got a clue. Even Hortensia, the head of it, they said, we don't know. We can't help you. Do what you can. But sometimes they came up with these, wonderful. And so in this case, Cambalache, meaning a bazaar or a junk shop, is a tango song.
But Cambalache is a famous tango.
Written
Cambalache is
especially by the Argentinian composer called Enrique Santos Discépolo.
famous tango.
And he wrote it for a film called, a wonderful film by the way, which is on YouTube I think, El Alma del Bandoneón, The Soul of the Bandoneón, is my film critic's hat now, directed by Mario Soffici, great Argentinian that nobody's heard of today, but he's a wonderful Argentinian filmmaker. And the song is explicitly critical. The important thing is the song is explicitly critical of 20th century corruption. And it was banned by one Argentinian government after another before censorship was relaxed under Juan Perón's first presidency. So you have to know that to understand the Cambalache. I didn't change it to jump shop. I kept the title. Oh, sorry, we were running out of time.
We're not going to finish with.
Yeah.
Do you have something to read, something just to finalize before we pop into a public very briefly or not? Yeah.
Well, I think we should open it up.
Okay,
I think we
fine.
should have-
Let's do that. So, anybody who has any questions for Sophie or Alan, please. Oh, there you are. Thank you.
Yes, en español.
Sí, muy bien.
As choosing, hay dos cosas que nos hemos olvidado de Mario, es que los poemas fueron hechos en música por Joan Manuel Serrat, que es muy importante eso, porque llegó a todos lo que es la juventud, ¿no? Y justamente en los años 69, 70, que es cuando él daba clases en la Universidad de la República, y los domingos daba clase a los jóvenes del PS para recuperar las villas miserias que habían alrededor. Y es muy importante porque en ese momento era el auge, ¿no?, de todo lo que era la izquierda. Sí.
Fantastic, fabuloso.
Sí.
Muchas gracias por ese comentario. So, thank you for that. Very good. So what he's saying is, mustn't forget the great Spanish, or Catalan, Catalan, sorry. Catalan singer-songwriter Joan Manuel Serrat, who I had the privilege to meet after his, in person after his concert in the Barbican, because I talked to him about Neruda's friendship with Miguel Hernandez. And of course, Serrat did a wonderful record of the song Times of Hernandez. But yeah, his record of songs of Benedetti is called El Sur También Existe.
Yeah.
It's a magnificent, I recommend it. You can hear them on The South Also Exists, meaning South America. Don't forget the South, North America. South also exists. And of course, he also, in later years, he did a lot of concerts with Daniel Villete, the Uruguayan musician, guitarist. They did wonderful concerts, and again, you can find them on YouTube. Actually, if we have just a few seconds, because I wanted to talk about the music in this book, the musicality, and I didn't have time because we threw it open, but I'll throw it back. The musicality, I wanted to, so sometimes it's almost as though you are reading a kind of tango. So just this bit from Tenía que salir, the bottom, and then I'll read it. Repetition of por ejemplo, por ejemplo.
Ah, yes, yeah. Thank you. Tendría que salir con los bolsillos llenos de piropos inéditos. Por ejemplo, los palitos de tu nuca desde ya me hacen cosquillas. Por ejemplo, 50-50, vos pones la virginidad y yo el Espíritu Santo. Por ejemplo, como el equilibrista que avanza por el alambre y no puede mirar hacia abajo y de pronto siente un retorcijón y entonces debe elegir entre la calma necesaria para conservar el equilibrio y la explicable urgencia para afrontar otras obligaciones. Bueno, así te quiero. Por ejemplo, tengo que presentarme, che, lobita, gurisa, yo soy Rómulo Remo. Por ejemplo, si tu sonrisa corre la Mona Lisa, llega Placé.
So this is the tango example, a kind of tango rhythm, a lilting dancing rhythm, you know, in Spanish. I tried to capture it in my English translation as well. So I just had to get out my pockets bulging with untried flatteries. For example, the little hairs at the back of your neck are starting to tickle me. For example, let's make a deal. Your virginity for my Holy Spirit. For example, like the tightrope walker on the wire who mustn't look down and suddenly gets cramp. He's forced to choose between the cool required to maintain his balance and the understandable urge to deal with other obligations. That's how I love you. For example, let me introduce myself, little wolf, my little chickadee. My name is Romulus Remus. For example, if your smile could run, the Mona Lisa would come in second behind you. Beautiful. Yeah, so I'm trying to capture the musicality, which is so important. I mean, and Ruben Darío himself, who was a kind of model for Benedetti, in some way, not the modernism, but that colloquial and the use of music. He said in his Darío, in his prologue in his introduction to Prosa Profanas, he said, "Cada palabra tiene un alma." Every word has a soul. And I think Benedetti believed that as well.
Any more questions? Okay. Oh, fine.
Hi, I'm just wondering, obviously we know Benedetti had this massive impact in America and Spain and the Spanish-speaking world. When did he begin to become known in England and in the English-speaking world? When did he begin to be translated, and why has it taken so long to translate this particular work? Is it just the literary difficulty of the task?
That's a very good question. I mean, the answer is difficult because I think he's speaking universal themes. The way he talks about love is something that all of us would understand. I think his love poetry is universal. And his novels and his short stories speak to everybody. I'm not sure. Well, I mean, maybe you have an idea, Sophie, about why he hasn't broken the bridge. We're back to the bridge again. Why he hasn't done it? And I'm hoping to. Obviously, when you translate him for the first time, you hope, and you could argue why it had not been translated before. You know, it was written 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago. Why? What is it about it? Because actually it speaks to everyone. You know, people.
It's about the publishers.
Yeah. I mean, someone has to take a risk. And luckily, we have a risk-taking publisher in our audience here. Tenement Press is a wonderful. I'm not just saying that because they have a wonderful list apart from this book. A wonderful list, and congratulations to Dominic for founding it and starting up and doing wonderful things.
So, to complement that question, do you think it's more important to translate novels than theatre? Is it been...
What a question.
I know.
No.
Okay. Good.
Is the answer. I mean, I think there should be more translations into lots of different languages and of different forms. I think theatre is a different way to engage audiences and indeed to engage students and other practitioners as well. So one of the things that I did when the production of Pedro y el Capitan, which was in English, so that had been translated. Pedro and the Captain had two translations, one quite soon after it was published in Spanish, so that was 1985, it was translated into English, and then there was a more recent one in 2009, and that was the one that was used for the production in London in 2016. But I think all of those are ways to engage audiences in different ways, and for us to shape as well the theatre culture, the literary culture in different parts of the world through translation. And what I was going to add about that production, Pedro y el Capitan, Pedro and the Captain, was that I and Catherine Boyle, who's Professor of Latin American Cultural Studies at King's College London, we actually went into the rehearsal room and did some work with the actors and the director on some of these kind of cultural resonances, on some of the references to Uruguay. So also there are amazing opportunities for learning and exchange. So I think translation is really important for not only disseminating work, but also changing cultural practices and theatre and literary practices. And in response to your specific question, Benedetti, some of his short stories and poems have been translated, and you can find them at Senate House Library. I don't know if you know that has a great collection. But it's true, maybe because of some of the things that you said about him sort of being alongside the boom, but maybe not part of it. Maybe because in general there hasn't been enough attention on cultural production from Uruguay, but there are people working to change that. So I think a mixture of factors. But I think it's great that there are more opportunities. Yeah. I'm really sorry about this microphone. I mean, it's not my fault, but I don't know.
The last question, I think one of the last questions we're finishing, are we? Last question perhaps? Okay. Last question? Last question.
Just to add really to what Sophie Stevens was just saying there, because the transition takes a long time to build up momentum, and there were books of Benedetti's poetry translated into English in North America in maybe the 80s, certainly in the 90s. Quite good selections, but it takes a huge amount of time. But now there are more, and I think it is extraordinary that Cumpleaños is now translated, because there would be a lot of resistance among many publishers.
But you need a publisher prepared to take the risk.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing.
That's wonderful. But it does take a lot of momentum.
Thank you. This is good.
I think that's it. I think we're going to finish. Yes? We have to be. Oh, sorry.
Just one thing I forgot to say before, just to remind our audience that next week we have Javier Cercas, the Spanish novelist, and so we are doing that on UCL because it's a bigger space, and then we have a lot of, but there's still some seats available. There's another event, but this is sold out here for the women during the night, the Franco time. This is which date? The Javier Cercas is Thursday, 22nd at 6:30. It will be in English, but he will sign books, of course. You know, he just wrote a book about the Pope. He did an interview about with Francisco, and so he will talk about his trilogy of noir besides the Pope book. So just to remind that, and of course, thank you very much, the Embassy of Uruguay, to thinking about the Cervantes to share this event. I really congratulate the three of you, because I think everybody enjoyed it very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will recommend you buy the book, and you read it, of course. But I believe you can purchase upstairs. I believe.
Yes.
Yeah. So I believe you can do that.
Wine
And a glass of wine. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone.